Hi, my name is Tim Carter, and this is a lesson for the students and those who, I guess, out there on the internet watch the YouTube channel. But this is actually Cornell University, just a brief lesson specifically for our church here in Jacksonville, because we live very close. We live in the shadow of the Missionary Baptist Seminary, where one of its most well-beloved, well-renowned professors, Brother John Penn, had worked and labored for decades. But anyway, he has an unusual relationship with our church that is a strong one, for his cousin had been here for years and years. So he had spoken here, done revivals, and then of course I went there. That is, I attended the Missionary Baptist Seminary, and you didn't really attend the seminary very long until your very first semester. You had him for hermeneutics, you'd have Brother John Owen for theology, and then a professor named Randy Murray at the time, who was a language teacher. Of course, never having attended the seminary and not ever being in one of the Lord's churches, I didn't know anyone. So my first year at the Missionary Baptist Seminary was my first year as a missionary Baptist. So, but it wasn't unusual for me. I had attended several schools and several since, and had never experienced a knowledge of a professor prior to enlisting in a course or participating in a school. So it was very normal for me. But I came to learn he was quite a resource for the school and quite a professor. So I was in graduate school several years ago, and I was his graduate assistant. I was a graduate student. So I don't know what to say, except I was very much trained, to do research and prove things or go back and look again. So that happened during seminary and graduate school. So years later, I'm now a research assistant for Brother Penn because of his strong relationship with Landmark in Jacksonville. My strong relationship with Missionary Baptist Seminary is one of its students, and his strong relationship with pastors all over. So he gave me an assignment to do research, and more than just me, but also Eddie Johnson, who was the golden boy in the seminary. I like to tease him about it because he was elected Missionary Baptist Student of the Year. Of course, I was just glad to show up on time. I was not one of the better students until later. I discovered all my disabilities and learning have now become my advantages. But the question is was he correct about the gap theory? I had no idea how many people associated themselves positively or negatively with the gap theory. I know when I was in seminary, it was something that for me was difficult to learn because it required learning and using Bible languages tools, then the science of hermeneutics, and then writing papers for Brother John Owen in systematic theology, because he would expect us to use and adhere to the science of hermeneutics, and then also in hermeneutics we were expected to use the tools which languages were. So by the time you were in systematic theology, and it was encouraging, and it was great respect to expect students to use these tools. So it was just difficult because ha, yatha, cow, perfect, third feminine singular, that was a headache for me. Ha, ya, come to be, and then finding Genomai in the New Testament, even later for Brother Penn in my research, find text that showed the translation of ha, ya as come to be in the Koine Greek text, so that you couldn't find a higher authority than the Holy Spirit in translating. So I did some more research, but one of the things in his hermeneutics book that I and several people who recounted our experiences in his coursework, in his hermeneutics, we wanted to quantify, capture, so we could reproduce and replicate the process. And no, not very many people know my background, but I came out of a background that was in high professionalism, which was to demonstrate an ability to control a process being repeatability, and the testability of that was, can it be repeated? So when I found myself being a research assistant again, unexpectedly, but it's certainly something. He really enjoys all the students, and we always had a lot of respect, and he's had a lot of accolades even today from the seminary. So anyway, so how do you prove it? Well, one of the things he taught us about context, the context principle, was as a context in which knowledge is shared, created, and utilized in recognition of the fact that knowledge needs a context in order to exist. So one of the assignments he gave was, what's the context of Genesis 1:2? Because he would hear people make reference. So I thought, oh my goodness. So, I wasn't prepared to prove the validity of the gap theory. I was always happy saying, well, some people teach that, and I don't want to be one of those people that condemns somebody, and then other people reject it, and I don't want to. Well, as a research assistant, I just thought, well, as a professional who evaluates according to formative, conformative, summative, and full scope evaluation methods, then those were all from my professional world, and those are things I recognized in his hermeneutic field that he had been formulating. So let's see what happens. Well, he was correct about Genesis 1:1 because he said, look at John 1:1, and then of course I worked in the languages, so found out that yes, the implication was expressly stated that the word was already being there in beginning. It was a timeless, there was no time there. Jesus existed before, and in beginning, the first word in Genesis 1:1, beginning, there is Jesus is there. Elohim, I learned in my research, that's Godhead. That's why it's plural. So I brought that information. So I went back because proving something was the highest test in engaging this evaluative process. So what was the proof? Well, if you have instant and spoken creation, which several people in the American Baptist Association, I know, scholars like Dr. Dillard, former professor, W.A. Dillard, Brother W.A. Dillard, and then Brother J.C. James in Credenda 2 had written about instant and spoken creation, and no one surpasses, from my knowledge, the excellency of Brother W.A. Dillard's work in Hebrew, and he demonstrated instant and spoken creation, and I was just amazed collecting all this. Well, then Brother Penn, again, he wants to be sure, so he sends several of us back, and through collaboration, we love collaborative learning. That's why we love things like the ABA Preachers Forum. I don't care about being wrong. I want to learn. So as a professional who wants to learn, and then as someone trained in the Missionary Baptist Seminary, because I was willing to be trained, I want to know the truth, and I was really encouraged to find that as he asked, more research before he would conclude things and then, bundle it up, if you will, he called our attention to in beginning creation and then in time creation, which we were taught in language. Parts of speech matter. So an adverb which modifies an action, so create in time and create in beginning, are totally two very distinct manners of creation. So bara was used in both cases, but they were carefully demarcated. So incident spoken creation, verse 1, Godhead in verse 1, Jesus already being there in verse 1, John 1:1, and then demarcating between in beginning creation and in the day, which is day refers to amount of time, so it's time, and it's actually the same word translated in other places, time. So the only difference between the word time and the word day is one is a quantified expression of the other. So anyway, he was right. The need to make it all stand or fall on come to be was found to be unnecessary. The emphasis being how did the instant and spoken perfectly created Genesis 1:1 statement, which has volumes associated with it, ancillary verses throughout the Bible. How did that come to be without form and void? Well, whether the writer was looking back and said it was in this condition at that time, which would have been Genesis 1:2, one need only look it up, and yes, there was Ha Yathah, and it came to be. That means it happened that this occurred. Well, no one disputes it. That is, the evidence doesn't allow disputation, which is great. It's just I was never as invested in the matter until Age of Earth came. So going back again to the language, use the tools, follow the science of hermeneutics. He reminded those of us doing research, and sometimes people that were a student, we would love to hate him in a kind way, because it's such a labor, but it's a joy to produce the work. But when he said to me one day in his office, his study, I should have said, that there's a formula here if we could just put all the numbers together. So I ran home, because I was always about the numbers and process control and then repeatability and can it be demonstrated and can it be tested, and I do trial and pilots in every place I've ever worked. And so anyway, long story short was I just took a little bit of arithmetic, simple arithmetic, and certainly, as he said, there was a formula there. And if you take approximately 6,250 years, and remember Jesus said there are 12 hours in the day, so I doubled that to 12,500, multiplied it, simple multiplication, times 360 lunar days, which I'd already done it on solar. He said lunar, and I was like, okay, so I'm the research assistant, he's the teacher, and he's master, I'm apprentice, he's teacher, I'm learner. So 12,500 times 360 lunar gave 4.5 million days, times 1,000 years was 4.5 billion. So the arithmetic's simple, but it's brilliant, because not only did he prove the validity of what happened in verse 2, he gave support from the text, Genesis 1:1, and then demonstrated that knowledge could not exist of these things without a context, and that he developed the context from Genesis 1:1 and then followed through all the way from Psalm 90 then into 2 Peter. And I'd never seen no research anywhere. I was scouring the references. I'd never seen anyone just simply write it out as a formula, and he was well pleased, of course. It's just he taught us in school. The language professors, Brother Mark Thornton was my Hebrew and Greek teacher in graduate school. He's a scholar in language. Brother Penn, a scholar in the science of hermeneutics, and then Brother Owen, a scholar in systematics. So put it all together. So I heavily relied upon the systemic approach of Dr. Owen, and I heavily relied upon the science principles of hermeneutics, a historical holistic approach, which he did, Dr. Penn, and then of course the language, especially in graduate school. Dr. Mark Thornton, as we call him in a school academic setting, was very adamant and very correct to say we can derive our theology from the languages. It's just a lot of work. So yes, Dr. Penn was correct, and some might say, well, aren't you celebrating? Not really. I'm really tired. I'm really exhausted. And those of you that have never been a research assistant for a scholar like that, or you've never written papers for a scholar like Brother John Owen, or you've never translated text and then written language-based commentaries for Brother Mark Thornton, then you have no idea what I'm talking about. But I'm glad that the work on certain things are done. We're working on so many other things. He keeps giving us work to do. So yeah, that's a joy. So yes, exhaustively speaking, Dr. John Penn was right about the gap theory, but so many more things. So you have a blessed day, and if you have a chance to contact him, or you run across him or see him, say, good job, Brother Penn, good job. So you have a blessed day.